Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be setting up a new format for historic military interviews. I've got the honor to introduce a co-host, Steve Towner, who's agreed to join me on the show. And we're looking forward to setting up a vets catch-up where we help vets that have left the military for whatever reason and are starting their own businesses or want to get going. And we're just looking to get that and see how we can support them in promoting their businesses and chatting to them and all this different services, support services that are available in Australia and New Zealand, and how we can share information about what's happening in the market. So, Steve, great to have you with me and great to kick off our new format.
Thank you, John. No, I'm actually the privileged one. After our digital archive meeting that we had the other day where you interviewed me, just for the listeners to understand, John and I have hit it off, both being veterans, a South African and Australian, and we just think that we have something special, just establish this relationship, but something special to offer our listeners and people in our veteran community. For two sides of the world. Obviously, John's been here for a long time. I'm actually married to a South African, so there's a good appreciation for each other's cultures and where we've come from. But yeah, we just think that there's an opportunity here to talk to veterans, to help veterans, and discuss things that you want to discuss at the same time, promoting people, within our community. Especially John and I are both on an e-com journey where we're both trying something new, trying to sell different products, and that's something to talk about.
Steve, what's been interesting for me, I've been doing interviews with veterans for 5 years now. So I've interviewed South African veterans from the Angolan Bush War. I've interviewed Rhodesian veterans. I've interviewed Australian veterans from the Second World War. One guy I interviewed was 102 years old. Absolutely amazing and really fascinating. I tell you, it's like, and he was 100% sharp. He knew everything that was going on. I've interviewed quite a few guys from Vietnam veterans, and you were the first guy I interviewed for the Afghanistan, Iraq wars and that. So, but what's fascinating to me in every aspect, all the guys I've interviewed, the same things apply.
Yes.
So we have, even though they're completely different eras, completely different battles, we can all relate to the same thing: the training, the food, the sit around and wait, and all that.
Yeah, the hurry
it
up
never
and
changes.
wait.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
no, and that's the special thing I think with veterans is that I actually help in my community run a small veteran group. We've been doing it for about 3 or 4 years now, where we catch up once a week. A lot of the ladies and gentlemen are well past their 70s, in their 80s, some are in their 90s, and it's that community that it builds where they come together, and some of them actually hadn't even served for very long, but there's some kind of link between us where you could come from the other side of the world, but we've all experienced the same kind of different hardships or challenges, and we have something to give to each other, which is that community, I think.
And I think, Steve, it's not only for veterans to chat to veterans about their life and what they're doing, but I think it's also for families. And we did an interesting podcast on a family, a very good friend of mine. His wife's uncle was a Spitfire pilot in Malta, and he got shot down and killed in Malta. And we did we worked together with him. He had quite a bit of information in terms of the logbook of the pilot and everything associated with it. And then we started contacting museums in New Zealand and Canada, and he did a lot of work. And then we put this whole interview together, and it was really fascinating because it brought it back to life. And it was, they had all the information there, but they had never had the ability to tell the story and
bring it together.
Yeah, and that the family could sit and watch it and enjoy it together. So I think there's a lot of value in that.
Oh, it's funny. The name of the group that we started down here was Sapphire Coast Veterans and Friends, because it's not it's not just something that affects, families, the actual veteran. It's the families, it's the friends that are, there's a legacy there as well that we need to honour and we need to talk about. I know that you've even got, someone on the horizon where you want to do the digital archive and an interview for, and it's not actually about that veteran himself. It's about a friend of his. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, that's right. Because I've had a couple of Vietnam guys reach out to me, and they want to honour a mate who's since passed. And to me, I think that's a great idea, is to sit down, and they're going to share his story, and they've got photos and that, so I can put that all together and share that. And I think
that's
it's
really
important.
Powerful, important. Yeah. I know. I was going to say the same thing. It's important. We need to preserve these memories, these legacies. Otherwise, what was the point of it? That's how I feel at times. We've got to talk to these older veterans and understand their story. I've got guys. I've got these two twins in their 90s. I think they're 96. And they both served in the 50s as conscripted airmen, and they went to RAF Richmond, served for 6 months. They obviously didn't deploy, but their stories, their legacy, the history that they have, the experience they had, it's important to preserve. I've done a couple of little articles on them. They're the kind of people we're looking for. So, can you tell us a little bit more about why you started? Why did you start doing this, and how do you go about doing what you do, John?
Because I think, Steve, you bring up, before I get into that, you bring up a really good point. And what people don't realize is for every soldier that fights, there's 7 or 8 support soldiers. That everything from bringing the equipment to the country, so the Navy, the Air Force flying guys back and forth, the medics, the doctors, the guys in ordnance units, the guys in engineering units. So there's so much support infrastructure, because you can't just, and a lot of guys are involved in the fighting, but they never even think about, how did the ammunition arrive and the food and everything else that just happens, because, when you're there, you've got no time to think about these things. And
these guys
stories,
no, you go.
No, but I think these are very interesting stories. And so it's not about, and with today's ability to capture all this, it's easy to capture it. We can capture it at low cost. So we don't necessarily, if you're doing a documentary for a TV series or whatever, you have to focus on the heroes and the big events, but we don't need to do that. So we can talk on the everyday issues and just the normal things. What's it like to be an ordnance unit, and what do the guys do? And they had to stand guard in the perimeter, and they had to do this and that, but then they could have other free time, and they work 7 days a week and all these type of things. And it's just interesting and fascinating to listen to those stories too. And I think this is important, because a lot of guys have said, well, we don't have anything interesting to say, but you have, and it's important to document it. So that's part of my thought, and that's why it's great to have you on too, because I think we need to capture all that.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the anecdotal little stories that they tell me, these two twins, is, at night time, they'd have to go out and use oil lanterns to light up the runway, that kind of, story and, that memory that they have. How amazing is that? They'd get a little, Willie's Jeep, go out there, light all these, lights for the nighttime, sorties and missions that they had, and then go and collect them again before the dawn broke, So just really interesting. So that's why I love hanging out with, these veterans, because it's just so much to still take away from their experience, and it's really important to do it before that, that memories are, they're gone, or they weren't shared. I was even speaking to someone the other day, and they said, my uncle, he served in Vietnam, and, has never spoken a word about what happened, what his experiences were, but just in the last couple of years has started opening up and, telling a couple of stories and really sharing it. And he's seeing that change of him being able to express himself and just get it out there, and how much that's changed him. And he's, getting old and, getting sick and that kind of thing, and how important it is to hear those stories before they're gone. So, Yeah, going back to my question, how do you go about it, and why do you do it? What is
Yeah.
it that you're doing?
But it all started by accident because
Mm,
when we hit COVID, we we had some other businesses. So when COVID started, we said, how do we keep in contact with our customers? And how do
yep.
we, and a mate of mine, we decided to set up a business podcast. And because I've got an automotive background, I was very specialized in automotive. So we set that podcast up and we started doing it. It was just to keep in contact. So we'd reach out to our customers and people involved in automotive, and we'd interview them and do that. So that's how it all started. And then what happened is our unit was coming up for a 40th reunion from when we
Yep.
were in the unit. And some of the guys reached out and said, why don't I just put some photographs together and just maybe chat to one or two guys, just to, as a remembrance, just for the guys in the unit. So it wasn't for anyone
Yeah.
else or whatever. So I reached out, and in our day, we weren't allowed to have cameras at all. They're completely banned. And I said, has anyone got a couple of photographs just to make the interviews a little bit more interesting? And suddenly out of the woodwork, we got like 400 photographs.
That's amazing. All these
Very,
illegal photos.
yeah, very grainy and blurred and that, because they were
Yes.
taken with old
Disposable cameras.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're all hidden and smuggled in and out. And so we put this all together, and we didn't have much. There's very little. We had 200 guys in the unit, and we maybe had 150, 200 views over about 3-4 months, and nothing more. And then suddenly it just blew out. Suddenly we're getting 50,000 views, 100,000 views on these videos. And the guys were reaching back to me and saying, this is like, it's totally amazing. I've never had the ability to talk about it, and I didn't know how to talk about it anyway, even if I wanted to talk about it. But they said, now my sons are 28 or 30, I could sit down and watch with them, and it was like me telling my story by just watching these other interviews and that. And that started to resonate with me. It's not, we don't need to talk about because this is for veterans and sharing veterans. It's not just for Joe Soap in the street. It's them helping to express themselves. And so it's not only you telling your story, it's by you telling your story, you're helping other veterans too. And that's how it started. And a couple of guys have reached out, said, do you want to, can I interview? And I said, oh, no, I don't want to talk about it. It was interesting. I interviewed a Rhodesian SAS guy. And when I first spoke to him, he said, no, he's definitely not going to speak about it. And I said, look, we don't want to speak about the war parts and those side of it. Just talk about the day-to-day stuff. And eventually he came on and we did it. And it was amazing. By the time we did the first one, he said, oh, that's like fantastic.
Let's do it.
I need to do it again. So I've done
another one.
Yeah, we've done 3 interviews with them. And everyone, even the one it's like interesting because they were in this ambush situation. They were 10 days in the ambush position. So they're basically not sleeping. It was monsoon, so it was raining continually. And they lay there for 10 days. They lay there for 10 days waiting for this ambush. And the whole interview is talking about all the things leading up to the ambush. We never really speak about the actual ambush. At the end, he said, oh, we did the ambush, then we had to get out pretty fast.
Right.
We had to open this hornet's nest.
Break contact and move. So we're going to get it. We'll get him back on to do more of that deep dive into the actual ambush then.
Exactly. So, but that to me is quite interesting. How that comes out and the benefit of it.
I know, talking to you as well, that one of the interesting things was understanding the dynamics of your government and, the situation at the time, which was also very much, everything was a bit secretive, clandestine. You didn't really want to open up to the world even what you were doing. So therefore, there probably would be a hangover feeling from a lot of your veterans as well, where they felt like they weren't allowed to talk about it. It wasn't something that was open to discuss, with amongst even friends, probably. The fact that you weren't allowed to have photos, for security reasons and sensitivity reasons, all of that would be quite liberating now to be able to talk about it. Do you agree?
Because in our time, we actually have to sign a document saying we don't talk about it. So you just never spoke about it. And the news bulletins and that they just never mention anything. And when it was mentioned, it was from a propaganda point of view. So it was a very skewed point of view. And that's interesting, because then afterwards you then because this is where you start to deal with all these things, and then you start to think, well, some of the things that were told maybe weren't true, or this or that, and that becomes
what were we doing? What was the purpose of it? You know, what was the mission? Did we achieve it?
And was it necessary or not? And then you start to look at all these other wars and that, and a lot of guys feel in that position. You know,
and that's where a lot of us veterans can relate to each other, can't we? Because we do reflect, and years after Korean War, Vietnam War, obviously the World Wars, all these other different conflicts, peacekeeping operations. You think, was it worthwhile? Did we achieve anything? What was the purpose? People obviously got injured or have long-term injuries. Was that worth it? It's a very complex issue, isn't it? I don't think. Yeah, I don't think we even understand it still. Like I know in Australia here, we've just recently gone through the Royal Commission, talking about the support for veterans. It's not an easy subject. I'm going to invite people to comment, to talk to us about it, and come on to this show and even talk to us and let's discuss it. But I don't think there's an easy answer. And even looking back on your experiences, there's no easy answer, is there, to all of this? There's no easy solution to fixing or mending some of the things that have happened. So,
but I think that's what chews the guys up psychologically afterwards, because then they start to churn all this through.
Yes.
The experiences and horrors and everything that happened, and then all these other things, because even from the Vietnam vets that came back, it's still the difficulty handling that is when they got back, some of the guys I interviewed, they said they went to the RSL for a beer, and guys in the RSL were saying, but you weren't in a real war. I said, but they were. And they said they actually got into fist fights in the RSL because these guys didn't accept them back. And that really, and the people didn't accept them, because they had issues with the government, but they were taking it out on the vets.
Yes.
And that was really, it's a complex situation, but they really suffered from it, and that makes it tough.
The horrible thing is that there's a lot of younger veterans that I talk to and, have spoken to, and, a lot of younger veterans don't feel like there's a connection either. Even I'm not saying all RSLs and with all other veterans, but, there is a bit of a disconnect at times. I don't know if it's a generational thing. I don't know if it's an age thing. Obviously, the more modern veteran that's, my age, younger, even maybe a little bit older, they're busy as well. They've got busy lives, we've got cost of living issues. We've got, other issues that go on in your life, young families. Maybe they don't feel like they're connected just because they're not at that point in their, in their life where they can connect properly. So, it's going to be really interesting to explore some of these problems as we, go on future episodes, I think.
But I think that is an important part of it, because it takes you, it takes you a longer period to start to try and deal with it and feel that you can then. So for young guys that were only there 10, 15 years ago, it's quite different to like us. We've been 40 years now, and we start to, like, you start to get to a period you're starting to reflect on your life. Maybe you feel, well, maybe we can talk about these. And then when you come in recontact with guys you haven't spoken to for 30, 40 years, you still realize you've got that strong connect. And you just talk about, you just sort of know.
Yeah.
It's not like you don't even have to talk, but you've got some sort of connection there. So to me, that's fascinating.
One good thing about veterans, we usually could just pick up almost, you might not have seen someone for 10, 20 years, and you can almost pick up where you last were, with your friendship, and it's really good. Can I just quickly, circle back to the fact that you reached out to me. So, just so everyone knows, John and I actually met through TikTok, which is not what I would have expected. A 60-year-old and a 42-year-old. That's not where I would have thought that two veterans would have connected, but we did connect there, which is awesome. John, you saw a video. It was literally one of my first videos because I'm on an e-com journey. I'm trying to help my wife launch a brand, and a part of that is being comfortable with doing socials. And you saw a video of me saying, hey, I'm a 42-year-old ex-army major just trying to learn how to do socials. And I think that was that one little thing that you needed to be able to go, wait a second, that guy's a veteran. I'm going to reach out to him and just connect. And that's how we connected, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Because I'm doing the same thing. So I've set up this e-commerce business. So we do extreme weather gear in terms of beanies and socks and all those type things for extreme sports. And I do the same thing. So I create all this social media content. That. So I was doing this. And then you come across interesting people and you say, there's some resonance there. We all have something in common, So.
And that was just enough for you to say, okay, I'm going to reach out to this guy. And you sent me a message and said, hey, I also do these podcasts. And you said to me, I'd love to interview you. I wrote back to you. I think the first thing I said was, why would you want to talk to me? I've got nothing interesting to say. And that's where, you let me know a bit more about it. The reason why I'm telling, this story, I guess, to the listeners is that at the end of the day, I felt that doing the interview was such a cathartic, great experience. So, and that's what the purpose of this podcast and YouTube's going to be about is we're trying to raise awareness. We're going to try and build together now a way of being able to do more of these digital archives for the veterans. And I just wanted to, I guess, reflect on my experience of doing it the other day. Was it stressful? Yes. Did I go red a little bit like I am now? Yes. Did I feel like I was a little bit uncomfortable? Definitely. But what I got out of it was amazing because, one, I got to connect with another veteran. I got to tell a little bit about my story. And what I think is that the purpose of why you do this, like you said earlier, is families, friends, the legacy. I would think that at some point in the future, potential grandchildren and that are going to be able to, tune into historic military interviews and see, their granddad, talking honestly and openly. We discussed a bunch of different topics. Like you said, you started asking me about what was the fitness standards like. There was no, did you go to war? Did you fight, an enemy, blah, blah, blah. It was very, very comfortable, enjoyable experience to the point where in the days leading up to it, I went through a little bit of a process, a cathartic process where I was going through old boxes of photos and I was revisiting that to the point where I shared some photos obviously with you, but I shared some photos with other friends, that I found, guys that I haven't seen in 20 years. I sent them a photo, we're still connected in some way through Facebook or phone or whatever. And we're having a laugh about it, having a catch up. So I guess I'm just trying to urge people that, if you do think, it's a bit of a weird process to be interviewed, it was actually a really enjoyable and a bit emotional at times. I did say to you at one point, I was a bit emotional about the whole experience. And I think it was really special. So thank you, John, for reaching out to me in the first place.
I think, Steve, the other interesting thing you said to me is you've had guys who were with you have already reached out to you. And you had a couple of hours catch up with these guys.
Yes.
And to me, that's an important part of it too. Because if you hadn't have done this, they wouldn't have reached out because they saw themselves in the photographs or they saw themselves in your story, and that's why they reached out. And I think that's so important too.
Little memory joggers. It was amazing. Memory joggers. It was funny. One of my biggest critics is my sister because she actually is into social media. So she's been my biggest help and my biggest critic in the lead up to getting better at doing socials. And I think the first couple, she was like, oh my God, take that down. You're embarrassing yourself. And now she's at the point where she's actually given me massive, praises and saying, I love what you just did. And that's only just over the space of a month. And I think I've gotten better quickly because of her critical, the way that she's gone about it. But it was amazing when I did the podcast the other day. When I sent it to her, she was flying to New York to cover Bridal Fashion Week, because that's what she does in social media. And she actually got off the plane in New York, wrote to me straight away and said, "When is part 2 coming out?" So I must have been doing something right, is the point of that. So I'm really, again, I appreciate everything you've done, John, because I have connected with more people. I've been able to revisit some things, probably even process a few things. So, yeah, really important. And that's what we're going to try and urge other people to do. Come, leave a comment. Tell us your story. Reach out to us. I'm sure you'll be able to, put an email address even, John, and just let people know that we're going to be here to talk to if that's what you want to do. So
I think that's really important, because I think it's what can we do to help guys now? And I think part of it is I think what's important is, if you are a vet and you have a business that you need to promote or want to talk about, come on our show and share your story about your business. And we can then promote that amongst other veterans and get other veterans to support your business. And I think that's a really great tool, and we can help in terms of that process. So if guys are out there and they're running any business, their own business, or want to promote their business, get in contact with us and we can share the story of their business and get other guys to try and support it. And I think the important thing about this is for veterans, and it's to share veteran stories for other veterans. So we're not trying to put something out there for, say, 27 million Australians and 6 or 7 million New Zealanders. We're putting this out there for the veterans. So it's a very narrow format and a very narrow focus. Yeah. So that's who we're targeting.
Families and friends,
exactly.
people that know you, people that work with you, people that maybe they don't even understand your story yet, because we don't want to just focus on just the business, or we don't want to just focus on their military history. We want to obviously combine it, and we want to show people who they are, where they've come from. Even in what I'm doing, I'm trying to, I guess, promote a little bit of what I did in my last 20 years, because that actually goes into the design of what we're creating. That we're creating a camping bag, and that design comes from some of that experience I had when I was in the military. I was just like you, John, we were both in armoured vehicles, and in an armoured vehicle, you have to be very organised. Everything has a place. There's a spot for the ammunition, magazines. There's, a spot for the commander's brew mug, so that's the whole thing. I've taken that into my design of what I'm doing, and that resonates through our new business. So what we want to do is we want to talk to you about your background, maybe how that shaped your company, or your startup or whatever you're doing, and talk about that. But we'll also talk about other things. Like let's discuss those hard topics. Let's try and draw more people, not just to this channel, but to this community. Let's share each other's experiences and celebrate each other's goals. That I think is going to be really powerful to do that, and to get the right people here to show you. We want to also talk to some of the support services, because I don't think that there's, especially me, being in Australia, it's a bit different probably for you, John, because you don't probably have as many support services, from where you've come from. But in Australia, there are a lot of support services that I'm pretty sure there's veterans out there that don't understand that they exist, or how they exist, or how they can benefit you. So I think it's going to be really important to get some of those big, organizations into this forum, ask them some questions, hard questions, easy questions, whatever we need to do to make sure that we get that point across, that there is support as well for our veterans. Because, that's what we've got to, that's our job, I think, John, is that we're going to be a platform to try and help and promote veterans, both in their business, but also in their personal life.
Yeah, I think that's really important, Steve. And I also think the other area is the museums, because I work quite a lot with the National Vietnam Vets Museum down in Phillip Island. And there's fantastic guys there, and they're doing tremendous stuff.
Yeah.
So it's supporting those type of organizations and getting them involved. But we also, in the one, when we did the Spitfire pilot, that interview, the Temora Museum up in Temora, they got a whole flight museum there. And we actually had a guy who's a Spitfire pilot. He actually came on to the interview, and he discussed a lot of the elements of flying a Spitfire and what could have possibly happened to this pilot. And it was absolutely amazing, really fascinating discussion. So it's also promoting those museums because they've got so much knowledge and information there. If we can digitalize it and put it out there for other guys to share and listen to, I think that's really good too.
Can I tell you a very quick story about me when I was a real young fella? I think I must have been in high school and I was doing work experience. I think it must have been like year 10, so this is, God, I don't know, maybe 97, something like that. And I was at this, it's at Tyab, Tyab Airport out in southeast suburbs of Melbourne, down south on the peninsula. And I was doing work experience at the old aeroplane company. And I believe it was a P-51 Mustang was there. And I think there was only a couple of them in Australia at the time, and they were refurbing it. That's what their specialty is. And as I said, this is a while ago. And they got me as a little skinny young fella to get inside because they were doing all of the riveting and, there was lots of, burrs and things like that from, cutting and whatever else. They wanted me to get right down in the fuselage, and crawl in there and with a vacuum cleaner try and vacuum stuff up. Anyway, behind a panel, I saw this like bit of cardboard and I pull it out and it must have been an original first aid booklet, like a first aid pamphlet for the pilot. And it was hilarious because as I went through it, just seeing how, the modern times had changed with the way that we were doing first aid. And at the time I was doing life-saving and so you do a lot of first aid in that. But it's hilarious reading through that and seeing back then the way that you did CPR was you laid the person on their back and you lifted their legs up and down, you pumped their legs. that was CPR at the time. So it was just an interesting story, just triggered in my head from talking about old aeroplanes. But, how good would that be to have that document? I'm sure it's somewhere and preserved somewhere. But, that's the kind of stuff that there is plenty of stuff out there that's not being shared, even if we could, digitize it, take photos, find out maybe where it's being preserved and talk about that. I actually, when I was getting prepared for our meeting the other day, I had a couple of props. I didn't know if it was the kind of interview where you said, show me something. I've got this hilarious, well, not hilarious, but it was a Saddam Hussein cigarette lighter. It's like this little statue of him. I'm pretty sure there's not many of those in the world. And, we don't want to see your war artifacts that you've, misappropriated. We're just talking about stuff that obviously shows us that history. That's what we'd love to see.
So I think to wrap things up, to me, if you're a vet out there, you want to share your story or talk about your business or want us to promote your business to other vets, reach out to us, write a comment below. We do have a website set up called Storycrafters Down Under, where we tell business stories and vet stories and that. You can reach out on that or just reach out directly to us. There is an email address on the website, and I'll leave an email below in the description. So get in contact and we'd love to hear from you. And also if you've got any particular topics you want us to cover, just please list them and in the comments and we'll be happy to talk about those.
Yep. And there are two parts to this. We're going to run this podcast and we want to talk to people and we want to be candid and be casual. And we're going to bring other organizations in to try and tell you what they can do to help support you. And then there's the other side, which is the digital archiving that John does. And, if I can help out as well, I will, where we're going to interview people and it will be more of a really edited, crafted piece that then preserves that person's legacy. So there are two parts that we're going to try and run here, aren't there, John?
Yeah, definitely. And if you're a family member and want to talk about a family member story,
Yeah.
we're happy to, especially if you've got his medals and some information about where he served and what he did, we're happy to interview family members to talk about their grandfather or their father or mother or grandmother, whatever, and put that into a digital format. So, and it doesn't matter what they did. It's not necessarily about whether they war hero or not. That's not the point. This is just telling that story of that particular person and what you know about what he did. So
this is just two vets having a chat, and that's what we'll do. It'll be three vets having a chat, or three, exactly. Two vets and a family member. So go to your shed, go to those old photo boxes or old army boxes, pull out your gear, and start reflecting on different aspects of people's service, and let's talk about it. Let's discuss it. Let's digitize it so we've got it forever. Thank you, John.
Good to speak to you, Steve.
Awesome.
I look forward to the next one.
Yep, next week.
Yeah, definitely.
Roger, John. Thanks, mate.